Get your brooms out, we gotta sweep! Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Die Hard MMA podcast. I'm your host as always, Clint McLean. This week we are going to cover UFC 236 on April 13th. It is headlined by Max Holloway versus Dustin the Diamond Poirier for the interim lightweight title, and it is co-headlined by Kelvin Gastelum facing Israel Adesanya for the middleweight interim title as well. We've got a double title fight, folks, and I could not be more excited for this fight card. First things first, we need to recap last week's event. That was UFC on ESPN2, headlined by Justin Gaethje versus Edson Barbosa. Boy, did we knock that one out of the park. I can't tell you how excited I am. We had a sweep, ladies and gentlemen. First sweep of the show. We almost pulled it off a couple of events ago where we went, I want to say 6-1, but this time we finally got it 7-0, top to bottom, swept the freaking board. I hope you all made some cash out there. We started our night off with Holland at a -190, and you know what? That was a back and forth scrambly fight. It was really entertaining if you enjoy the ground game, but boy did Holland show some bad ring IQ. We've got to keep that in mind for his next fight because that was kind of an untrustworthy performance. I really thought he was going to pull that submission off, but he decided he wanted to engage in bad situations, and that's just not a good sign moving forward. So we're going to have to keep a close eye on him in his next matchup and make sure he's not fighting an opponent that's going to be able to take advantage of that. Sodiq Yusuff put on a wonderful fight. That was a really defensive fight. Both Sodiq Yusuff and Shaman Moraes really showed their defensive striking in that matchup. Neither of them really put themselves in danger, and Sodiq actually still almost managed to finish the fight. He landed a huge bomb on Shaman Moraes in the third round, which I actually believe may have won him a decision. I think it was really close, maybe 1-1 going into the third, and it just came down to who wanted it more, and we were on the right side of that one. Sodiq pulls out the win to give us our second unit of the night, and wow, here we go with the dogs. Paul Craig pulls off a third round late submission to give us the finish against Kennedy Njoku. And oh boy, was I going nuts. I got to give a shout out to all my fans on Twitter who were telling me, no, don't do it. Don't bet Paul Craig. And I'm telling you, you bet Paul Craig in the right situations. This was the right situation. Kennedy Njoku showed flashes of brilliance, and he's going to be a great fighter moving forward. But this was just too much too soon. Paul Craig has been in there too many times, and Kennedy's weakness is Paul Craig's strength, and that's exactly why we bet on him in this spot. I think it was 1-1 potentially going into the third. If Paul Craig had a good showing, he might have won by decision, but he managed to get that triangle choke slapped on there at the very end of the fight and put it away with just seconds left on the board. Oh man, we had to sweat a little on that, but that made it all the more fun to cash that plus 185. My girl, Michelle Watterson, she came out and put on a clinic versus Carolina. That was so slick. I really imagined that in my head when we were breaking down the fights over and over and over, and I saw Watterson doing that all day. Carolina's checked out. I really worry about her mental state as far as the fight game goes, whereas Watterson is really hitting her stride, and I expect her to see in a title shot very soon. You know, Emmett, he came out after that bad face-breaking type of KO loss that he had, and he really showed that he belongs back in the deep end of the division by doing what he did with Michael Johnson. He had to dig deep. I arguably think that he might have been down on the judges' scorecards after the first 2 rounds of that fight, and he put him away in the third round with a walk-off KO. It was gorgeous. Then Hermanson absolutely mauled Branch, and he pulled a quit job, a grade A quit job. David Branch wants nothing to do with this fight game anymore, and that's what we talked about. We talked about being worried that he was going to give up and quit. He's got all the skills, man, but he's just done. He's checked out. He's looking for a paycheck, and that really showed. I do think Jack Hermanson wins that fight. However, I didn't think it would be that one-sided. I truly believe that Dave Branch is just showing up for a paycheck at this point. Then we went on to the main event, and oh boy, the violence that Justin Gaethje puts on other men. Holy crap, he wrecked Edson Barbosa. Barbosa did his best. He came back at him, and he tried to go leg kick for leg kick with Gaethje, and you could see it on his face. He realized that that plan was just not gonna happen. Gaethje is a freaking wrecking ball, man. Cashing plus 160 inside the distance. That was just the right side to be on. I mean, I can understand people taking Barbosa, but if you're not playing that fight inside the distance, then what are you doing? Because we got an extra, I want to say, what, 40 cents? Something like that to take him inside the distance as opposed to playing him straight. That's what we do here on the Die Hard MMA podcast. All things considered, 7 and over plus 8.74 units. That brings the record to 42 and 26 plus 35.30 units. Man, that feels good. All right. Shake it out. That's enough patting ourselves on the back. We've got another fight ahead of us. Now, unfortunately, this week there is no MMA event. And the reason that this episode of the podcast is coming to you early is because my ass is going to be out of town. So I figure I might as well record you guys a show. We'll drop it early. We'll get some picks in. And then you've got something to listen to during the week when none of the other podcasters are really putting anything out. And then I just don't have to worry about doing the podcast on the road. I do want to go ahead and say thank you to all the new fans and followers of the Die Hard MMA podcast. I got well over 100 extra followers on Twitter thanks to our sweep at UFC on ESPN2. We got a whole bunch of new followers, so I'm looking forward to some new names, some new people to interact with, maybe some new questions. Let's get this going. We've got a whole bunch of new people I'm expecting to tune in and hear the show. So welcome to you all. Welcome to the family. What we're trying to do here, for those of you who are new, the Die Hard MMA podcast is basically for people who are either bettors, who aren't into MMA and want to get into MMA. They are for casual fans who are new to the MMA sport, and they are also for diehard MMA fans who just want to talk about it and maybe are going to Vegas and have $50 in their pocket and want to put some cash down for a fun weekend. The whole idea behind the show is that if you are not a diehard MMA fan, we are going to make you one. And if you are not a diehard MMA bettor, we are also going to make you one. I cannot guarantee that I will be sweeping the board 7-0 from this point on because that takes a crap ton of luck to pull off. So everyone that's here listening to my show for the first time, do not expect me to shit out winners every other week because it's not going to happen. Those of you who have been with me for a while, you understand we are shooting for 52% of our bets to win. If you win 52% of your bets, you are a winning bettor. So that's all we're looking for. Sometimes the luck will go in our favor like it did the other night and we'll have a sweep. Sometimes the luck will go against us and you better believe we will have a reverse sweep night one of these nights where I don't sound like I know what I'm talking about whatsoever. I'll lose every single thing on the board. It will happen. So if you're new, thank you. I'm glad to have you, but I also don't want anybody thinking that I'm an absolute expert or a professional sports bettor giving advice because I'm not. I'm a fan of the sport and I'm a fan of betting and I do a little bit of both. So if I can put some money in your pocket and we can have a good time talking about fights, that's what the Die Hard MMA podcast is for. Bet and tail at your own risk. One final thing before we get into breaking down UFC 236 is I do want to let you all know that I am a 9-to-5er. I do have a family to support, and right now I'm not doing anything to monetize the podcast. I will never go tout. I'm never going to charge anybody for my picks or plays or anything like that, but I would like to turn the podcast into some form of revenue for myself and for my family. So at this point, all I've got going is if you want to support me, if you want to support the show, tips are appreciated. Maximus in 3D at gmail.com is my PayPal handle. If you wouldn't mind firing tips over there, especially after a good night like we had last week where we swept the board. If you guys had a wonderful night, if you throw some change down, if you make some money and you feel like tipping me for my hard work, I would appreciate it. If you're a fan of the show and you just want to send a tip in to keep the show going, I'd appreciate that as well. I also have Venmo, so that's an option, and you can get a hold of me on Twitter at DieHardMMAPod for all your questions and concerns, and I especially love chatting, answering questions, breaking down fights, and really whatever other random stuff you guys want to get to. I'm a total nerd, I'm a geek, I love my Marvel movies, I love my Dragon Ball Z. Really hit me with anything that you want. I kind of want to turn this whole thing into a little bit of a community. I don't want to just be a voice on the end of the internet who's talking to you and telling you where to put your money. I'd really like to build a little community out of this thing and have a support group going, so don't be a stranger. And without further ado, let's get into UFC 236. One last thing for the new people to the podcast is I don't go over every single fight. I go over the fights that I find interesting, and I go over the fights that I find that we're going to have value or I want to place a bet on. If you have a fight that you want to know more about and you feel like chatting with me about it, that's exactly what Twitter is for. But I'm not going to break down the entire card top to bottom because there's just not that many opportunities. One of the things that's kind of a little pet peeve for myself is on other podcasts when people break it down from top to bottom and then they go, it's just a pass. We're not going to have a play on this one. it just feels like kind of a letdown. So I'm not going to do that to you guys, and that's just kind of my own personal style. I like talking about all the fights and all the matchups, and I do enjoy hearing other people's breakdowns of them, but I'm going to save you some time. I'm not going to break down a fight. We're not going to have a pick on unless I find something super interesting about it. The first fight of the night that we really have any interest in is going to be Curtis Millender versus Belal, remember the name, Muhammad. Now, I know a lot of people on Twitter who actually got the opener with Belal, and they got some dog money on him, which, gotta hand it to you, that is the way to go. Now, this fight, I really think it's a dog or pass situation. I don't think Belal should have been the dog. I really think that he should have been the favorite, and he, rightfully so, is now. It looks like 53% of the money has come in on Belal Muhammad, and it looks like they have moved that line to where he's about a minus 135 favorite. We're getting about plus 110, plus 115 over on Curtis Millender, and I think this is a dog or pass situation. Curtis Millender's last loss was to Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos by rear naked choke in the first round, and that doesn't look too good, but we actually got to see just what a kind of fighter that Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos really is. Big shout out to my boy at Rocker Z over on Twitter, because he knows all about Zaleski dos Santos, and he has been telling us all about Zaleski dos Santos, but nobody else really seemed to know about it until his last fight when he took out Curtis Millender, and it was impressive, let me tell you. So I'm actually going to kind of put a line through that loss, because apparently Zaleski dos Santos is a bit of a beast. I was on Curtis Millender in that fight against Zaleski dos Santos. I really thought he was going to be able to use the height and the reach and keep the distance, and he just really got overwhelmed by the kind of pressure that dos Santos was able to put on him, got taken down and choked out right away. That fight was just last month on the 9th of March 2019, so Curtis Millender has actually come in here after just about a little over a month off, and he's diving right back in against a guy like Belal Muhammad. And I actually think that's a great idea for this kind of a kid. He was really riding hot before that. He stepped onto the UFC scene, KOs Thiago Alves, wins 2 decisions in a row. He's looking like he's headed for the top end of the division, and then he runs into the buzzsaw that is Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. Now, obviously, he doesn't feel like he had that great of a performance that night, so he's looking to get back in there quick. Belal Muhammad is also coming off of a loss, and he just appears to be a decision machine lately. His last 5 fights have all gone to decision. Before that, he got KO'd by Vicente Luque. I really think that Curtis Millender, my opinion of him has not changed. I was riding high on him in the last fight. I thought he was going to be able to keep the range. I thought he was going to be able to defend the takedown. I think the same exact thing is going to happen here that I thought was going to happen in his last fight. Now, if he proves me wrong this time, then shame on me for getting caught by this kid again. But I do not think that Belal Muhammad is the kind of pressure fighter that Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos is. So we are going to snatch up the plus 115 that Pinnacle is offering, and we're going to ride on Curtis Millender to bounce back. We're starting our night off with another dog. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We like betting the underdogs here at the Die Hard MMA podcast. That is the only way to live in MMA. Now, the next fight that we're interested in is going to be on the main card, and it's ironic because it is Max Payne Griffin that we're talking about, facing another Russian dude, Zelim Imadaev. Imadaev. I don't know how you say these stupid Russian names. He's 8-0. He's from Russia. He's a good wrestler. The reason I find this interesting is because Curtis Millender is one of Max Griffin's most recent opponents. And like I said just a minute ago, I'm pretty high on Curtis Millender. They fought on July 7th of 2018, and that was a decision loss to Millender for Max Griffin. And then Max Griffin lost to Thiago Alves, which we were on that one hardcore. We had Thiago Alves by decision for plus 375 that night, and I do honestly believe that it was a judge's robbery split decision. That fight was close. It was very, very close, but we had a whole talk on that episode of the podcast about variance and betting and how you've got to watch it because you never know what's going to happen inside that cage. We talked about how Thiago Alves' only course to victory in that fight was a decision, and we took him from, I think, a plus 180 underdog to a plus 375 underdog by betting that line of Thiago Alves by decision. It was a split decision robbery. That's what we were betting on. The coin flip went in our favor, and we had all that juicy underdog money on it, and we walked away a winner that night. Poor Max Griffin is coming off that split decision loss to Thiago Alves, where he cried robbery, and deservedly so. It was a close fight, but I actually did score it for him myself. So I really think Max Griffin won his last fight, which would put him losing to Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos, who's another guy we just talked about, winning a decision over Mike Perry, losing to Millender, who I'm high on, and then getting robbed against Thiago Alves. Theoretically, that makes him a 500 fighter in the UFC. I do actually think he has a decent head on his shoulders. Sometimes he gets lulled into a fight just a little bit, especially with strikers, and that's kind of what happened with Thiago. That's kind of what happened with Mike Perry. One of those fights went for him, and the other one went against him. And this is another spot that I regularly find opportunities to put bets down on people, is I love fading people when they're stepping up in competition. I just think, it's a select few that are actually able to rise to the challenge and rise to greatness. And when you take these fighters who have been fighting a lower level of competition and they take that first step up, usually that's when they get that first L. Usually that's when the deep waters are just a little too much for them to handle. They go back to the drawing board, they realize the difference between the regional scene and the pro scene that is the UFC, and then they come back stronger later on. We see that all the time. So I think Max Griffin is being ever so slightly underrated in this case, and because this guy's limb is a Ov, as they call them, a Russian fighter with the last name that ends in something around an Ov, and he's an 8-0 phenom-looking type of kid. People, I think, are slightly overrating him because of that. He's got a bit of a padded record. If you look at some of the people that he has been beating, it's not the highest level of competition. Granted, he has finished them all via KO, TKO. He's 8-0 with 8 of those by finish, and most of them coming in the first round, so he does look promising. However, he's going to get in there with a seasoned striker like Max Griffin, and Max was able to avoid the power shots of a guy like Mike Perry and just outwork him to a decision. And I really think that's something that he could do here in this case. Enough money has come in to basically flip the line, and Max Griffin is now a slight underdog. So we're going to snag him at plus 105 over at Pinnacle because we got another dog. He opened up as a favorite. We're going to get a nice juicy money line on him here at plus 105, and let's ride it and see if he can force this kid to swallow his pride and take that first L. Because as the guys over on Half the Battle will tell you, it is first L time for everybody eventually. Nobody gets out of this game undefeated. Now the totals aren't out yet for this fight card, but I would lean to the over 1.5 on this fight here, and we might get a decent line on it because the other kid is such a finisher. Because Zalim is 8-0 with all of his wins coming by knockout, they may be expecting him to do the same thing to Max Griffin. But like I said, I think Max is going to be a seasoned enough veteran to slow down the pace of this fight, and it would not surprise me if this thing got into the second round or maybe even went to a decision. So keep an eye out for that. If you get a good line on the over 1.5, I would lean that way as well. So not an official pick, but something if you want to throw some more money at it. That's something I'd lean to, and might even be on it later. You got to watch out for my Twitter. Since we're a full week ahead of the breakdowns for these fights, these lines are going to move a little bit, and these are just my initial picks and thoughts on here. So keep an eye out at Die Hard MMA Pod. I'll be tweeting out things if they change. If I decide I want to go a different direction or have more picks to add, that's where I'll be doing it. The next fight on the card that we are interested in is Wilson Reis versus Alexander Pantoja. Reis is 23-9-0, whereas Alexander Pantoja is 20-3. This is in the UFC's 125-pound division, and Wilson Reis is getting a little bit older. He's 34, which I guess that's not that old, but he seems a lot older than his opponent, Alexander Pantoja, who's only 28 years old. And Pantoja actually has a decent number of wins on his record, but one of the big ones that really stands out to me is against Dustin Ortiz. He lost a unanimous decision against Dustin, who is an absolute grinder. Now, I know MMA math does not work. A plus B does not equal C, but Wilson Reis has a unanimous decision win over Dustin Ortiz himself, and honestly, Wilson Reis to me is basically just a 125-pound version of Damian Maia. Those of you who don't know who Damian Maia is, he's basically the best jiu-jitsu practitioner in the sport of MMA today. He has a chain grappling takedown style, and his submission game is second to none. He is a legitimate world-class jiu-jitsu specialist, and he chokes out basically everybody except the best wrestlers in the world at 170 pounds. Now, Alexander Pantoja and Wilson Reis is not exactly apples to apples in that example, but Wilson Reis has fought the better upper tier of competition in this weight class. He lost to Demetrius Johnson back in 2017, who was the champion at the time, and then he lost to Henry Cejudo right after that in 2017, who is the current champion. And boy, have our eyes been open just to how good Henry Cejudo is. So he lost to John Moraga, which I really feel like he was just kind of down on himself in that one. He bounced back against Ben Nguyen and showed that he's not done yet. He's got some improvements in his hands. His ground game is sharp as ever. And I really think that this is a situation where a top tier guy is really being disrespected because we're seeing him being 3-1 in his last 4, but you really got to remember who those were against. Wilson Hayes is by no stretch of the imagination an old dog that you can't teach new tricks. His striking is improving, and I really think this is a striker versus grappler type of matchup. Alexander Pantoja is going to be the better of the two on the feet, and Wilson Hayes is going to be the better of the two on the mat. Now, if Wilson Hayes is able to get it to the ground, I really think he stands a good chance to actually choke out Alexander Pantoja, or just grind out a decision win like he tends to do. And we're getting a nice, fat, juicy line on him at this point. We've got plus 155 over at 5 dimes, and I really think we should take advantage of this before it dips any further. The early money has come in on Wilson Hayes, driving it down from the opener of about plus 160, and we should look to lock that in before it plummets any further, because I think he's being disrespected in this line. I understand that Alexander Pantoja is the younger fighter that's coming up. However, he does have less experience when it comes to the top tier of the division, and even though Wilson Hayes has losses to those guys at the top end of the division, he has a top tier skill set, and if he is able to hold his own on the feet, I really see him getting it done on the ground. Wilson Hayes is going to show some improvements, and the best thing about his style is that he can throw recklessly on the feet, because if the fight gets to the ground, if he gets clipped or if he knocks his opponent down, that actually works in his favor. He has no problem doing that, whereas Alexander Pantoja is going to have to be careful about the strikes that he throws, because he will not want to end up on the ground underneath a guy like Wilson Hayes. And that really handcuffs somebody when they're in this kind of a fight and it takes a piece of your game away. That right there in itself puts the edge to the other fighter. So let's roll with Wilson Hayes at plus 155. The next fight we're interested in is basically the main event for the prelim card. Jalen the Tarantula Turner versus Matt the Steamroller Frivola, which we've got a war of fight names on this one, ladies and gents. I'll be honest, I've got a slight bias against Jalen Turner because I freaking hate spiders. Spiders are like my worst fear in the entire world, and the reason his fight name is the Tarantula is because, no joke, no shit, he owned like over 100 tarantulas at one time. His own mother has confirmed this story. He's a weird dude. But we are not here to judge people based on how weird they are in their personal lives. We're here to judge people based on how well they fight. And man, he is a kill or be killed kind of fighter. I love it. He came into the UFC after a successful night on the Tuesday Night Contender Series with Dana White, and he fought Vicente Luque. Now, if you're not that deep into the UFC, you don't know about Vicente Luque, you should. We all know about Vicente Luque. He lost by KO in round 1 to that monster, and then he rebounded against Callan Potter with his own TKO in the first round, showing that he really does belong in the UFC and he can hang with some of these guys. He's 8-4-0, so his record isn't that impressive. He seems to have been a little bit wild, and I really think at this point he's starting to come into his own. He's starting to put it together. I think in his younger career with some of those losses, he really wanted to stand and bang and relied on his athleticism, and now he's starting to use that weapon in a more professional manner. He's starting to be able to rein in those tools, and I really expect some good things from this kid in the future. He's facing 6-1 Matt Frivola, who's a teammate of Ally Aquenta, so that in itself is dangerous. He's coming out of the Cerro Longo fight team, which is a very, very good gym, and you can be sure that his wrestling game is on point coming out of there, so he may look to grind out a wrestling decision type of victory against a guy like Jalen Turner. The question is, can he get it done? I think Jalen Turner is going to have the explosiveness, the height, the strength, the reach. I think all the physical advantages are going to go to the younger Jalen Turner in this spot. And like I said, I'm high on this kid moving forward, so with all the physical advantages going his way and the fact that he is only 23 years old, he's got so much room to improve. I think he's going to be the fighter of the two of them that's going to make more drastic leaps in how good his game is. So it would not surprise me one bit to see Jalen Turner come out here and be able to defend the takedown, land a bomb, and drop Matt Frivola. I think we're going to roll with Jalen Turner in this spot. Right now, we can get him at minus 124 over at Pinnacle, so we're going to go ahead and lock that up. We are fading the public a little bit. The majority of the money has come in on Matt Frivola, so we're getting a slightly better line than when it opened up at about minus 140. I'm actually okay with that. I don't mind going against the betting public. I see something in this kid, and we're going to go ahead and roll the dice on him at a shorter line. I do like that part. Minus 124. Let's go. And that brings us to the main card, kicking off a light heavyweight tilt between OSP, Ovince St. Preux versus Nikita Krylov. Now this fight is fun because it's a rematch. OSP actually beat Nikita Krylov way back in 2014, and this is also Nikita Krylov's second stint in the UFC. So this is going to be very, very interesting because it feels like they're giving him a second shot, and he actually just lost his UFC second debut, I guess you'd call it, against Jan Blachowicz via submission arm triangle. Jan Blachowicz is no joke. That's jumping straight into the deep end with both feet. But he actually left the UFC after getting submitted by Misha Cirkunov in the first round back in 2016. So I think we've identified a key weakness in this guy's defense here. He has 6 losses, 5 of them are by submission, and only 1 of them is by KO TKO. When he gets to the top level of the game, if he's fighting somebody who's got an offensive submission style, that's where he gets caught. And I really think that Ovince St. Preux is really going to do the same exact thing he did to him the last time. He has a tendency to manhandle people because he's physical, he's explosive, he's just a big dude at 205. He takes people down and he chokes them out. And I really think that's exactly what's going to happen in this fight again. We'll keep it simple because I only see this fight going one way. Ovince St. Preux is a real gatekeeper style fighter. When he takes a step up in competition, Dominic Reyes, Ilir Latifi, John Jones, Glover Teixeira, Volkan Ozdemir, Ryan Bader, those are the guys that beat him, and those are the names that you know. Anytime he fights anybody else who's not quite on that level, he submits them. It's just what he does. And I really don't see Nikita Krylov as making that many improvements. Like I said, I know Jan Blachowicz is a great fighter, but he lost by submission again just in 2018, so it's not like he's fixed that hole in his game. He's KO or bust. If he ends up on his back, he's a fish out of water. I think Ovince St. Preux plays with him around on the feet, puts him on the ground, and then once he does, maybe we'll even see another Von Flue choke. Ovince St. Preux already holds the record for the most Von Flue chokes in the UFC, and I think he just adds another one onto the record here. These two guys are lined at about a pick'em right now. It opened up with OSP being a slight favorite, which I agree with, and then enough money has come in to drive it down to basically even money. We're going to take Ovince St. Preux at minus 107. I think he submits Nikita Krylov just like he did the last time they fought. He's a physical force at 205, and Nikita Krylov has a glaring weakness in his game. Ovince St. Preux is not a stranger to a decision either. If Nikita Krylov doesn't clip him and put him out, which I don't necessarily see him doing, Ovince St. Preux has the chance to win this thing by decision. So right now, we're going to take him at minus 107, basically a pick'em price, and later on when the props do come out, I'm going to look at what they'll give us for Ovince St. Preux by submission, because that's really how I see this fight going, and with it lined at a pick'em, I wouldn't be surprised if we could get somewhere in the ballpark of plus 180 or plus 200. Again, not an official pick. We'll take him straight for the purposes of him being able to win a decision against a younger fighter, but me personally, I will probably throw some change on him by submission. Next up, we've got Alan Jouban facing Dwight Grant, and this is another fight that I just love, with a guy coming off of some issues and another guy stepping up. I am really high on Dwight Grant. Dwight Grant is relatively new to the UFC. He's another kid that I'm just really high on. He lost his UFC debut against Zach Otto, which that raises some questions for some people, but then he rebounded against Carlo Pedasoli Jr. with a massive KO at the very last second of round 1, and it was beautiful. I was on him for that fight, and I really think the line was off. They're disrespecting him because of his loss to Zach Otto. And right here, he's facing Alan Jouban, who's a guy that's really, really technical. He has a win over guys like Mike Perry, Bilal Muhammad. I mean, he's got some decent wins on him. He's also lost to guys like Nico Price and Gunnar Nelson. Again, no shame in those kinds of losses. However, we're really not sure where to put Alan Jouban at this point in his UFC career. He did KO Ben Saunders back in February of 2018, but that's really not saying a lot. Ben Saunders is beyond the tail end of his career, and KOing him doesn't tell you much of anything. Alan Jouban has been off with a bunch of injury issues. He's really needed some time off to heal up and get himself straight, and you really got to wonder where that leaves him mentally speaking. He's been doing some modeling type of gigs. He's got a podcast that he's doing, which I can't hate on that too much considering what I'm doing right now. But when it comes to being a professional fighter, you got to be all in it, otherwise you're just not going to get there. And he's been 50-50 in his last couple of fights here, and really facing a young up-and-comer with guns blazing like Dwight Grant, is that the kind of spot that you want to be in when you're coming back from an over-year-long layoff? I don't think it is. I really think Dwight Grant is going to have the speed advantage in this fight. I definitely think Dwight Grant is going to have the power advantage in this fight. The key piece of the puzzle here is that Alan Jouban might just have the technical advantage in this fight. So it's going to be speed and power and athleticism versus technical skill and veteran savvy. And that gets us in trouble sometimes. I do have the fault where I tend to lean with the power and the explosiveness, and I don't always account for just how savvy someone is. But I really think coming off of injury layoffs, this is the kind of time where we can put a little asterisk next to Alan Jouban's technical prowess. And I'm going to be all over Dwight Grant in this spot. I know a lot of other people are on Alan Jouban. As a matter of fact, 90% of the money that's come in has been on Alan Jouban, and I'm going to roll the other way. We can get even money on Dwight Grant over at 5 dimes, plus 100. I'm going to lock that up and take it to the bank. I think Dwight Grant wins this thing handily. He may even KO Alan Jouban. Jouban's got some chin issues, and all it takes is one shot from Dwight Grant over the course of 3 rounds. And Alan Jouban is not going to wrestle this guy. It's not going to be another Zach Otto situation where Dwight Grant has to worry about the takedown. And really, if Alan Jouban does try to change his whole game around to suddenly be a wrestler and put this kid on his back, I think he's going to get clipped on his way in. So I really just think it's going to be a short night for Alan Jouban. And this is another one where I'm going to look for the props because I think we might get a juicy line on Dwight Grant by KO because of the kind of fighter that Alan Jouban is. The bookies may forget about his chin. So keep an eye out for that one. Let's lock Dwight Grant up at even money, plus 100. Another dog. Let's go. Let's go. Now, the next fight is one that I'm super interested in, but I'm still not sure what I want to do. So you're going to have to keep an eye out for my Twitter on this one. We're looking at Eric Anders versus Khalil Roundtree. Eric Anders is 11-3-0 and has some vicious knockout power, but he's actually been kind of underwhelming in his last couple of fights. Khalil Roundtree is chinny as all shit, and he's actually got some decent power of his own, and I think he's coming into his own as a striker. However, you cannot forget about the fact that he just doesn't have a chin. So in this case, I feel like the line is way off. I mean, 64% of the money has come in on Eric Anders. I do think he's the rightful favorite in this case, but he's sitting at minus 170, minus 175, and the comeback on Khalil Roundtree is plus 150. I just think that line is too far off. I am so tempted to bet Khalil Roundtree in this spot, but I just don't know if I can bring myself to do it. He's a chin case. His last knockout was to Johnny Walker in the first, which there's no fault in that. Johnny Walker is my new favorite fighter on the planet Earth, and he knocks everybody out in the first round, so you can't fault him for that. Just before that, Khalil Roundtree did beat Gokhan Saki via TKO in the first round by brutal KO. He KO'd Paul Craig, he KO'd Daniel Jolly, so it's one of those situations where he doesn't really have the highest level of competition in the UFC, and you flip over to Eric Anders, he lost a split decision to Lyoto Machida, and Machida is a very technical striker, especially for a young up-and-coming type of fighter, and I honestly think that Eric Anders got robbed in that fight. I recall that fight very, very well. It was a split decision loss, and I do believe it should have gone Eric Anders' way. He lost by KO to Thiago Santos, which Thiago Santos is facing John Jones, who doesn't lose to Thiago Santos by KO. He did lose a split decision to Elias Theodoro, which again, everybody loses by split decision to Elias Theodoro. But one of the things I'm seeing with Eric Anders is that he doesn't seem to have that killer instinct that we all expected from him. When he first started fighting, he was KOing absolutely everybody. And it seems like he fell in love with that power, and I'm not sure if he's trying to be more of a point fighter and restrain himself so he doesn't gas out or something along those lines. I'm really not sure. But it just seems like something is missing. It seems like he's more than willing to go to the judges' scorecards and coast these days than he used to be, rather than coming out there and going for the kill. And if that's the case, Khalil may not have to worry so much about his chin. If Eric Anders is not going for it to clip him, then Khalil Roundtree may be the one who returns the favor. Now, over the course of 3 rounds, that doesn't mean Khalil won't get caught, though. So I am back and forth all over this fight. I see value on Khalil Roundtree, but there's always the risk of that one big bomb coming from Eric when he decides to flip the switch and just putting Khalil down. So I'm going to look at this thing and see what the lines are when it comes out for the props and see what I can get Eric Anders by KO, but I don't know if I can trust either guy. So I know I gave the whole speech about not passing after breaking down a fight, but I'm actually really eyeballing this fight. I may have a play on it later, so I wanted you all to know what I was thinking on it. I'm leaning Khalil Roundtree with the dog money at this point. Keep an eye out on my Twitter. We'll see what happens as the fight gets a little closer. And now the co-main event of the evening, Kelvin Gastelum is facing Israel the Last Stylebender Adesanya, and this is just a dream of a fight. These are two guys that I honestly never thought that I would see each other face off. When, you're listing the names of the matchups of the kinds of fights that you want, this is one that I never ever would have picked. I would never have volunteered for this fight, but now that it's in front of me, I love it. I love it so much. It's just an absolute clash of styles. I am high on both of these guys, and it makes it very, very difficult for me. Kelvin Gastelum has got hand speed that is unrivaled at 185 pounds. He's a smaller guy, and he hits like a freaking truck. He's really heavy-handed. He's got technical boxing and good footwork, and he gets in there with the kind of speed and pop that really just wrecks people, and you can see that on his record. He TKOs a lot of guys, and his killer instinct is something that I really love. Once he's got you hurt, he just goes for it, and he really never stops, and that's something that concerns me here. Now, 16-0 Israel Adesanya is riding high, coming off of his wins over Derek Brunson and Anderson Silva. He's the next big thing. This kid's got the height, he's got the reach, he Anderson Silva. And Anderson Silva was the greatest of all time, especially when it came to striking. He played games and was able to make other people look like they were standing still. And I know he's older, I know he's not the Anderson Silva that he used to be, but what Israel Adesanya did against him over the course of 3 full rounds is very, very impressive. He's going to have a large height and reach advantage on a guy like Kelvin Gastelum, and I know that's no different from anything else we've ever faced with Kelvin Gastelum before, but in this case, it is a bit of a special circumstance. Israel Adesanya is so creative with the way that he strikes. He manages the distance and the range very, very well. He's going to be able to hit Kelvin when Kelvin cannot get to him. There's almost a 10-inch reach advantage here in this case. Kelvin Gastelum is listed at 7.1 inches for his reach, whereas Israel Adesanya is a whopping 80-inch reach. It's going to be difficult for Kelvin Gastelum to close that distance. He's basically going to have to bum rush in, and when he does, Israel is going to counter with knees and elbows, and he's got fast hands coming from all angles. I really don't want to doubt Kelvin Gastelum, but at the same time, I honestly don't see how he wins. I know it's a title fight, so I know it goes for a full 5 rounds, and one of my buddies that I was breaking down this fight with said that Kelvin Gastelum is the side because he's the underdog in this case, and Israel Adesanya is basically going to have to fight a perfect fight over a full 5 rounds to be able to take the decision here. And the problem is I think he can. I think Israel Adesanya can fight a perfect fight over a full 5 rounds. He's done nothing but fight perfect fights since he got into the UFC. That's literally all we've seen from him. He's been masterful in every single fight that he's been in. Kelvin Gastelum, on the other hand, has had a couple of bumps in the road. He lost a decision to Neil Magny. Now, that was back in 2015, I know, but he did also lose by submission very recently in 2017 to Chris Weidman, just because he was the bigger, stronger man with a grappling advantage. Now, I don't see this fight going to the mat because neither of these guys really like to wrestle. That's another thing that people have said. Kelvin Gastelum has the wrestling advantage in this matchup, but does he? I don't think he uses it. He almost never uses his wrestling. He's not going to threaten Israel Adesanya with his wrestling, and even if he does have a slight wrestling advantage, can he take Israel Adesanya down? I know you want to side with the shorter man in a wrestling exchange because he's going to be able to get low, he's going to be able to get under the hips, but does he have the type of explosive wrestling that it would take to put a guy like Israel Adesanya on his back? I don't know that he does. I think he would struggle with a takedown, and the whole while you're going to be getting elbows from Israel Adesanya on top because he'll have no problem reaching your head while you've got both of your arms wrapped around his legs. I just don't see how Kelvin Gastelum wins this fight. I hate saying that. I'm a massive fan of Kelvin Gastelum, but I do not see how he wins this fight. I really think he has to go for broke, and Israel Adesanya clips him and puts him down at some point, or Israel Adesanya circles and picks him apart like he's done to everybody else in the UFC since he got here and wins a 5-round decision for the new interim champion of 185 pounds, Israel, the Last Stylebender Adesanya. And this is a spot where I do trust a fighter to lay the wood. I'll be honest, I don't like taking big favorite lines. They just don't work out well in MMA. They're not trustworthy enough. You lay a lot of juice, and one loss can really crash a night by laying 2.5 or 3 units to win one. So I'm not a big fan of doing that. But in this case, I think it's warranted. Israel Adesanya could win this fight inside the distance. He could also grind this thing out to a decision. And I really like him in this spot. We're going to get him at minus 170 over at Pinnacle. Let's lock it up. Israel Adesanya, minus 170. The main event of the evening is a lightweight fight between current featherweight champion Max Holloway coming up to 155 to face Dustin the Diamond Poirier. And oh my God, this is another fight where it's not one that I really thought I was ever going to see, and I never would have chosen. But here we are. The 145-pound champion is moving up to 155 pounds because of the shit show that is the lightweight division right now, with all the champions and all the fighters basically arguing over that number one contender spot. We're throwing another one of the greatest of all-time fighters right smack in the middle of it to stake his claim for that belt. And this is going to be a good one. This is one where Max Holloway has done some incredible things. His loss to Dustin Poirier was all the way back in 2012. He's only got 2 other losses on his record, one to Dennis Bermudez and one to Conor McGregor. Max Blessed Holloway is currently riding a 12-fight win streak. That is unheard of. And in that run, he has back-to-back wins over former champion Jose Aldo, who's one of the greatest of all time. He TKO'd him in round 3 in both of those fights. Anthony Pettis, Jose Aldo, Brian Ortega, all by KO are the last 4 fights that we've seen from Max Holloway. This kid is something special, and he's got a head of iron. He's Hawaiian, which really, honestly, the fighters from Hawaii are notorious for being able to take damage. He's got a brick head. You just can't hurt this guy. Now, on the flip side of that, you've got Dustin Diamond Poirier, who really has overcome all odds and turned into an incredible fighter himself. He's another one of those guys that I feel like people kind of started to write off a little bit, even though he's just been incredible on his way up the scale. So he's got wins over guys like Justin Gaethje, Eddie Alvarez, Anthony Pettis. Dustin Poirier's resume is not quite as expansive as Max Holloway's is, but he has been up a weight class this entire time. Now, while 145 is exciting and it's got some incredible fighters, 155 is stacked top to bottom. The top 15 could theoretically be the champion on any given night. That's how good all of those monsters are at 155. This is another spot where I would just love to take a stab on the dog, because it should be kind of a coin flip fight, and you want to say that it's a lot closer than the line suggests. The problem with that is, even though I feel like the line is off, just like the co-main event, I do think the favorite wins. Max Holloway is the champion at 145 pounds, and he's going to get an extra 10 pounds of muscle and water weight in his body. He's going to step in here, and he's still going to be the larger man over Dustin Poirier, even though he fights a weight class below. Max Holloway doesn't go to the ground if he doesn't want to. His wrestling and takedown defense is something to behold. He keeps the fight standing and he wears his opponents out. He puts a pace on them like nothing you've ever seen before. The crazy thing is, that's kind of what Dustin Poirier does at 155 as well. His wars against Justin Gaethje and Eddie Alvarez really showcase his cardio and the fact that that's just what he does. He puts it on guys until they wilt. We're going to see an unstoppable force facing an immovable object in this fight, and one of these guys is going to break. I am super stoked to find out who, but I really think that Max Holloway is the guy that has shown more durability. He's shown more improvement over the last couple of years, and honestly, he's got the age advantage going for him as well. Even though he had those concussion problems from trying to cut all that weight and stuff like that, he's only 27, whereas Dustin is 30. And it's not a huge difference. They're both in their primes, but I really think Max Holloway is going to be able to stay outside, pick his shots, eat to the body, and then eventually in the 3rd or the 4th round, he's going to do what he does to everybody to Dustin Poirier. I'm going to be on Max Holloway in this case. Since we're so early, like I've said several times, the props are not out yet for this fight. I don't want to lay the minus 220 that we can get for Max Holloway right now. I'm going to take Max Holloway inside the distance because there's no way this fight is going the full 5 rounds. Like I said, I truly believe that Max Holloway will crank this thing up a notch in round 4, and he'll be able to put Dustin away at that point. So I'm going to take the props, Max Holloway in round 3, and Max Holloway in round 4 specifically. Those will be nice, juicy underdog lines, and we'll lay maybe like a quarter or a half of a unit on those to get some big fat lines. Those won't be official picks for the podcast, but I'm telling you I'm going to be on those myself. And I really think there's going to be on value at those because they're usually right around 10-1, 9-1. With most fighters, they're 13 or 15-1, stuff like that. But maybe the bookies will be on to us in this case with Max because he has a track record of doing that. But I think this fight gets into the third round. I think Max puts Dustin down a little bit later on. I think he's going to carry some more heavy hands. He's going to have some more power and pop in his punches when he's up here at 155. I think we will see the best Max Holloway that we've ever seen. When the line comes out for the prop at 5-9 for Max Holloway inside the distance, I'm going to credit myself with that line. So when you see my picks on Twitter right before this fight kicks off, whatever that Max Holloway inside the distance line was, that's where I will be. The other option for you that I actually kind of like is if you want to, parlay Max Holloway with Israel Adesanya. That lowers your risk. You're only risking 1 unit in that case. You can parlay them and get about plus 130 on that right now. So you'll get plus money return on that. And that way you don't have to risk 2 units on guys. You are only risking 1 unit. But then you're rolling the dice against both Kelvin Gastelum and Dustin Poirier in the same night, which both those guys have a tendency to show up. So that's up to you, but it is a playable option if you want to lock some action up right now before those props get out. And real quick, I just want to apologize to everyone. I did put a poll out some time ago for what this break week was going to be for us. I was going to do a fun little show that wasn't betting related for everybody because there weren't going to be any fights on for us to give picks or anything like that. And really what I was going to do was either something fun where I tell some stories about, gambling experiences or my training experiences and stuff like that I've had, get to know each other a little bit better. Or I was going to do kind of a boot camp, let you all in on the kind of decision-making process I have, what I look for in fighters and stuff like that. And that was the one that won the Twitter poll, as everyone wanted to know my process. I will do that video for you guys. I promise I'll do a series breaking down how I make my picks so that you're all aware of just kind of how I go about my handicapping of mixed martial arts. I think that sounds like a great idea. It'll be fun, but since I'm going to be out of town next week, I apologize. It won't be happening this time. We'll have to do that next time we have a week break between fights. So to recap, we're going to kick our night off with Curtis Millender at plus 115. We are going to take Wilson Hayes at plus 155. Max Payne Griffin at plus 105. We will lay the wood with Jalen the Tarantula Turner. We're on OSP at minus 170. Dwight Grant at plus 100. We're going to sprinkle the KO prop on Dwight Grant. We're going to sprinkle the submission prop on OSP. We're going to lay the wood with Stylebender at minus 170. And we're going to take Max Holloway inside the distance at whatever the bookie sets that line at. Thank you all so much for tuning in. One last time, thank you for my new followers. Thank you to my new viewers and listeners. Hit me up in the comment section on YouTube. Tweet at me at DieHardMMAPod on Twitter. I have an Instagram. We've got a Facebook going. I love you all. Let's put that last week in our pockets and parlay it on some of this week. We're going to make some more cash at UFC 236. Love you all. Let's roll.